Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. I hope everything's working out okay. This is I've presented this content many times live, but this is my very first webinar ever. So today we'll be talking about careers and finding a job that you love quickly. We'll talk a little bit about our reorg world, because everything that we're doing now with respect to our careers, including our job searches, is set in the context of this reorg world where things are changing so fast and changing so much that it can be hard to keep up and know what to do. Our previous generations had the jobs, they kept jobs for many more years than our generation. So we have to get a lot more used to job searching on a regular basis. We're going to talk about a job versus a career. I like to see them as two different things. I believe they are. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about who you are and why that matters when it comes to job searching. We're also going to talk, the bulk of it, the discussion will be around getting a job. So how do we get a job that we love? And then we're going to talk a bit about making a plan at the end. I truly believe that making a plan is incredibly important, and setting goals is incredibly important to our overall professional success, including getting a job. So, who am I? I've recently written a book called A Spark in the Dark, Illuminating Your Path to a Brilliant Career in a Reorg World. That book isn't out yet. It will be out in May, and it covers a lot of topics that we're going to discuss and a few more. So when it comes to job searching, I think it's really important when we're not getting the results we want to make sure that we do what I would call a post-mortem on our success. So look at first of all, your collateral. And by collateral, I mean your resume and your LinkedIn profile. Are these really working for you? And we know that they're not working if you're looking for jobs that you're qualified for and applying for those, but your collateral and you're not getting interviews. So that would mean that there's something going on with either your resume or your LinkedIn or both. Because we do know, the research tells us that about 80% of people considering a candidate for a role will go look at their LinkedIn profile. So it's really important to have that right. It's also, of course, very important to have a great resume, and that's something that we're going to discuss today. If you are getting a ton of interviews, but then you're still not getting job offers, obviously that means that there's something going wrong with the interview process. And there's lots of things that we can do to help that along. So one of the things I suggest, if you think that you're struggling with interviews, is find a friend who's had experience interviewing people or had a lot of success in the interview process, and get them to help you by doing a mock interview with them, and then they can give you feedback. And then amazingly, some people do really well through this whole process, and then their follow-up isn't great. Actually, many years ago, once interviewed for a job that I ended up getting, fortunately for me and unfortunately for the previous candidate, they had got to the point where they were about to get a job offer and did something terrible in terms of follow-up and were really hard on the people or the HR department in a note they sent to the hiring manager, and they didn't end up getting the job. The other thing that we have to be really good at in this reorg world where we're changing jobs all the time is, of course, networking. Because networking is going to be really important, even when you're in a job, to keep your network going, because we never really know when things might change. So always look at these buckets and decide, if you're not having the success that you want to have, where might things be going wrong? Let's talk a little bit about our reorg world. So I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anyone on this call that we live in a world of constant change. And that's really going to be meaningful to us in terms of our careers and our job searches. The way I look at it, there's four big reasons why, probably a lot more, why we're living in this reorg world. We have a highly connected world, and that means many things. It means that we have more access to information about jobs. So when I talk about a reorg world and people changing their jobs a lot, I don't just mean they're losing their jobs. They're choosing to leave their jobs for a new challenge, a new industry. People aren't just changing jobs now. They're changing careers. A few of the questions that came in to me before I gave this presentation from you was about changing careers, not just changing jobs. So we're doing a lot of changing ourselves. We want new challenge. We're also in a world where social media tells us stories about everyone else around us and beyond, even beyond our own communities, how well they're doing, how well their careers are doing, what conferences they're speaking at, what promotions they just got. That can be a little overwhelming and make us feel like maybe we're not doing enough and we're not getting the results we want. So we keep moving. It also gives us access. So being connected means that we can see a lot more job opportunities that are out there and go after them. So that can make it really exciting. It's not, I say that it's difficult, it's also exhilarating. It's a really interesting time to manage a career in our history. So there's a lot of tech progress, and people are certainly losing jobs to technology. It's also opening up a lot of jobs. So that's definitely something to be aware of. Economic factors, of course, influence our career outcomes. Companies, have no choice but to let go employees at certain times. There's mergers and acquisitions. So people are in roles that have been duplicated, and the company obviously can't keep more than one person in the same function. And the sheer pace of change, things are changing so quickly. I think sometimes companies make decisions too fast to let people go or change things, but it does affect our outcome. And also, similar to the connected world, the pace of change means that we want things to progress quickly as well in our careers. So that affects our outcome. So what does all of this mean to all of us and to you? I say that our careers are like a revolving door, and we kind of have to get used to that. And that's why I tell people that they should always be resume ready. They should always be LinkedIn ready. That's really going to be very important. It's going to be important to your overall outcome. It's also going to be important to your confidence when things may not be going well in a certain job, to know that you're ready to make a change. If you feel like a reorg is coming, to know that you're ready to handle that. So let's talk about what I mean by job versus career. So taking a look at this slide, you see that there is that sort of frame. And inside that frame is what I see as your job. If you remove that frame and you look over the entire panoramic view, that's what I see as your career. So specifically, to me, your job is your current role or position. It's something you do to make money. It's another's definition of who you are, something over which you have limited control, and it's temporary. Whereas a career is your life's work, something you do to achieve greatness in a field or an industry. It defines who you are, and it's your definition of yourself, something over which you have significant control, and it's permanent. So looking at it this way, I know that I've been there too, in a job where you're not happy, where things aren't going as well as you'd expect or as you'd expect. And we can feel burdened by that experience and unhappy and unsettled. But I've always taken the approach that even if I'm unhappy in a job, I still give it my all, because overall, when I look at terms of my overall career, it's going to have huge implications, because if I give up in a role, I'm losing the opportunity to learn. I'm losing the opportunity to connect with people. All these people in my network at my job could be people that I interact with and you interact with later over the course of your career. And you certainly don't want them to have a memory of you that you haven't, shown up the way that they would expect, because they might have certain influence over your outcome later. There's just so many reasons when we're in a job to make sure that we're engaged, even if we dislike the work, even if we dislike the people we work with, to stay engaged, because it will influence how things turn out for you. One of the things we'll discuss later, and that's really important to our career, is to set a North Star, to know where you're going. Because if you know what you want to do, and I know that's a difficult question in an interview and not one that I've appreciated in the past, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the answer these days is probably not here somewhere else or running my own business. But it's really important for yourself, not necessarily to discuss in an interview, but for yourself to know what your North Star is and aim towards that North Star, because it will make every day feel less cumbersome when we're in a situation that we're not enjoying. And then we'll know what to do to get to where we want, the types of people to connect with, both in our workplace and outside of it. So there's a few myths and facts. I'd like to dispel some myths in terms of what it takes us to get ahead in our career, because what it meant for our parents' generation to get ahead is very different for what it means for our generation in terms of getting ahead. People have traditionally thought that what will get us ahead in our career is expertise, a strong work ethic, competence, and commitment to our job. And now the fact is that likability, the ability to communicate who you know, and timing are incredibly important. I'm certainly not saying that expertise and competence are not important. They matter, but they're not, as important, or they complement these other things. If you're not likable, it's really, really difficult to get ahead in your career if people don't like working with you. Who you know will be so incredibly important to the connections to different roles that you can make. Our ability to communicate, to collaborate, what people call, soft skills, these are also incredibly important to our overall outcome. Because I wrote an article recently, and I should say that a lot of this content too, you can find more information on my website, where you can find out about a lot of these topics in more detail, because I've written articles on them, one of which is on soft skills. So soft skills really do help us get ahead. And one of the reasons is because people who have strong soft skills are just really good at getting things done. It's important to have great ideas, but if you can't sell those ideas in, how do you get ahead? So just think about those things when you think about how you manage your overall career and how you show up in your everyday workplace, if you're currently working or when you have a job, how you show up. So let's talk a little bit about you and who you are. So I say that this is one of the most important questions that we can answer, and it's also one of the most difficult. It seems like it should be obvious, but it can be really tough, not just to know who you are, but to convey who you are to the rest of the world and do that effectively. So I say, I love this cover, Hard Times. And even when I look over my career, I think about not just knowing what I wanted to do, but knowing who I wanted to be. And I look at this little Aaron boy on the right-hand side, and he's, that's who I felt like at the beginning of my career. It was tough. And, I was being told what to do all the time, and I kind of had to do everything that I was asked to do. And I wasn't really empowered to make many decisions early on. A lot of people, and maybe some of you on this call, and I think it's a great thing, want to be the guy in the top hat. They want to be the top level executive who's making a lot of big decisions, has a large team. I knew that's not who I wanted to be. And that was a really important insight for me. It just wasn't something I wanted for my overall career. What I wanted to be was that guy in the middle, the person who is dependent on for information, the enabler of someone else's success. And so that's who I strove to be. So I would challenge all of you to go and reflect on that in your own time and think about, maybe this isn't the right picture for you, but think about, who do you want to be over the course of your career? Think about, what is my role and how will I have the greatest impact? We can't all be good at everything, and I talk about this a lot in the book. And actually what I go through is what's called an illuminate exercise. So it's figuring out who you are and then what you want to convey to the world. And I talk about many different things with respect to who we are. So one of those things being what you're good at, what you like, and what can make you money. Because those things and when it comes to a career, we all need to earn a living. So those things all have to kind of come together, and I explain it in terms of a Venn diagram and kind of what's shaded in the middle. And then figuring out, I've given an example here for someone, so to teach people who are disadvantaged. So that person would need to be articulate as one of their identifiers, approachable and available when they're needed. So the identifiers are words or statements that describe who you are. So these should be conveyed in everything you do. And these are the things that people should say about you when you're not in the room. And whether you're communicating in person or family, with friends, or on social media, which is such a huge one these days. We're seeing so many people regret some of the content that they post on social media, and some of the things they put in writing come back to haunt them later. So really think about, I certainly do, think about when I'm communicating with people, whether it's through email, whether it's with you today, I know what my 3 identifiers are. I know what my purpose statement is. And in every interaction I have, I go back to those things and I stay grounded in those things. And even with my friends on Facebook, before I put up a post, I think about, what am I saying and what is that going to convey to the world? And it's really important when it comes to searching for a job. And one of the reasons that it's so important is because you want to be known for consistent things among different people. I know when people have called me for references for my former colleagues or team members, when I said to them things that they've heard about that person from other people, they say, oh, that's consistent with what I've heard. And that's something that makes them feel good. They like the consistency because then they know they're getting the real story. So just really think about that. Unfortunately, I don't have the exercise available yet, but it will be very soon. So let's get into the bulk of this discussion. So getting a great job in a reorg world, and how do we go about doing that? So a few people had some questions for me about networking, and this is one that comes up a lot. And many, many people write and talk about networking, but I absolutely promise you that you will hear some new things in here and tips and tricks that you can start to apply right away. One of the very first thing I always talk about when it comes to networking is that networking is about generosity. And I love this quote by Tony Robbins. The only way a relationship will last is if you see your relationship as a place that you go to give and not a place that you go to take. And to me, this just is such an important thing to think about. I think about it in both my personal and professional relationships. There's so many people on LinkedIn particularly who want something from us, right? So isn't it great when someone comes to us and actually gives us something that's definitely something and gives us something meaningful that will really help us out? And that's kind of how I've approached everything that I do when it comes to posting on LinkedIn, when sharing job ads with my network of job seekers, writing articles that I think will help people get through, what are tough times when you're between jobs and looking for a job or trying to manage a career. So if you go to your network as a person who's known as a giver, that will really help you. And actually, someone said to me the other day, and it's so true, give, get. And I think that if all of us took this mindset and this approach, we would all be better off. So I get this question a lot, working with people who are out of work, is what can I give when I don't have a job? And the wonderful thing about social media is that there's tons of things that we can give when we don't have a job. People always love likes and comments on posts that they make on LinkedIn. And if you're trying to get into a new network and appeal to new people, it's always great to engage with them on LinkedIn in that way and comment and start a conversation that way. And you become someone to them who's familiar if you start doing those things. And it will be easier if you ever want to reach out personally to do that as well. You can in fact, someone I had at one of these sessions actually who was out of work introduced me to somebody she thought would have meaning to me in her network a few weeks after we met. So that was great. And you can do that and help people that way too. The other thing is, if you know someone has interests, you know what those interests are, you can send them articles. Or if they write an article and you have an article that's related to what they've written, you can send that over to them and information share. And that's another way to give at a time when potentially we don't have a job or feel like we have something to give. So there's always something that we can do to help other people. So I've written an article on this on my website. It's www.reorgworld.com, and it's under the blog. So I talk about a signal flare approach to job searching. If you're out of work, that can actually be an advantage to you when it comes to the job search itself, because some of the people that you might be competing against can't publicly state that they're looking for a job. So what I suggest to people who are unemployed is a few things, and it also depends on your comfort level. So you could write a little post on LinkedIn. I've recently written an article about there not being any shame in being let go in a reorg these days. Reorgs happen all the time. So just know that there's no shame in that. And if you've been affected by a wide-scale reorg, consider that that's pretty common these days. So you don't have to worry about it. Put up a little post on LinkedIn. I've written an example post in that article. And then you can also send an email to everyone in your network. And you can do it at one time if you don't have time to make it personalized. You can BCC everyone, so carbon copy them. So all of the respondents can't see who you're sending it to. And include the fact that you're looking for a job, what area you're looking in, and attach a copy of your resume, and just let them know that any help that they could give you, you'd really, really appreciate. I did that actually a number of years ago, 15 years ago or so. I moved back to Canada. I was living in England, and I was restarting my career here in Canada. And I got an interview a couple of days later after I sent out that email, and I had a job within a month. So I really strongly advise people to take this advice. It's a great way to get a really good job quickly. When you design an email like this, and when you're talking to people and you're out of work and you're networking and you're going for networking meetings, it's incredibly, incredibly important to know what you want. Because if the people in your network don't know what you want and what you need, they will not know how to help you. I can give you an example. I have a friend who regularly talks to me about her career and what she wants. And I want to help her. I like her. But she says things to me like, I want a role that's strategic, and I want to manage people, and I want it to be interesting. That doesn't really tell me a lot. But if I have another friend who contacted me last year and said, Amy, I'm looking for a job at director level at a CPG company, and I'd really love the opportunity to work out of the US, Chicago preferably. And then I said right away, well, I know 5 people that I can introduce you to, because that person was specific. They knew what they wanted, and it's also very memorable for me. And when we're working with people on our careers and looking for a job and asking for help, it's important to remember that even with the best intentions, we've all got incredibly busy lives, and memories are fragile. So having a very clear story will really help you to be remembered by them if that right job comes up. So just consider that when you're making your request. And sometimes it's good before a networking meeting or before we're speaking to people, and of course before we write an email, to think about not just what you're going to say to them, but think about the end game. What do you want to get out of this interaction? And then you can design the interaction to get what you want. So just think about that. So the other thing that I find has really helped me over the course of my career is positivity, being positive. People will avoid you if they expect you to complain, and we all have that friend or that colleague who will complain, right? So it's really, really important to think about, we've all had negative experiences, and we certainly need to talk them through. But think about what your outlet is. Some of the clients that I work with, their outlet is me, and that's the right outlet. But they don't tell everyone. They don't tell all their friends and all their family. And one of the reasons that I've advised people to stay positive, even if they don't feel it, is because, first of all, you can make yourself feel it by faking it. But also because if you talk to your family and friends and tell them all about how disgruntled you are with your situation or with your work, and they are going to connect you with a job, they might worry that you'll be negative in the interview, or you'll be negative once you start the job. So even though they say they help you, they may not in the way that you'd expect. So consider that when you're thinking about what your outlet is. For some people, it's working out, going for a walk, doing whatever you need to do to try to get rid of the negativity and focus on the positive and speak about the positive. The other thing that I would say is that when you think about your networks and who's going to actually help you get a job, don't discount, and I don't have a slide on this, but I would say don't discount your loose network. So sometimes we expect that it's our primary network of people that we actually know and interact with on a regular basis, or that we've previously worked with, that are the ones that are going to help us the most when it comes to starting a business or excelling in our career and finding a job. And it turns out to be the people we know that are second degree or third degree connections that actually end up coming through. So just think about that when you think about how you network and who you network with, because help may come from an unexpected source. Saying yes, I found that this has really improved my overall outcome in life. Just saying yes to different opportunities. You know, people sometimes see their career as a straight line of upward mobility and staying in one function. Companies love people who have a breadth of experience, not just a depth of experience, so that they can think end to end in a business. So consider lateral moves. Say yes to those. Those can be great opportunities and come with unexpected benefits. The other thing about saying yes is I'm not just talking about the attitude, I'm talking about the actual word. So when you have the opportunity to say the word yes, take that opportunity. The word yes actually elicits a positive response in our brain. Unlike its very evil antonym, which I've heard is the most dangerous word in the English language, which is no, a word I try to avoid saying as much as possible. Because if you were raised in a English-speaking household, you would have heard that word and it would have had a negative context for you from the moment that you could understand language. So it's no surprise that that word actually causes cognitive paralysis, very, very briefly, and it leaves a very negative impact on the person who's heard it. So even in an email, if someone says to you, are you able to come for an interview on Tuesday at 2 p.m., you can respond by saying, 2 p.m. works, I'll see you then. Or you can respond by saying, yes, 2 p.m. works, I'll see you then. And you will have elicited a positive cognitive response from them just by saying the word yes. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of literature that you can read. I haven't written anything really about it other than what you're seeing here, but you can read a lot about words and how the different words we use matter. And I strongly advise you to do that. There was a woman who changed careers and she went into a new business. And this word kept popping up in her inbox all of a sudden, and she didn't know what was going on. And that word was just. And she asked herself, what's changed about my current environment versus my previous environment? And what had changed was that she had come from an environment of predominantly women of predominantly men to an environment with predominantly women. And the word just is considered a permission word. So I just want to talk to you about, I just want to say that, or I just am emailing you because. Whereas men don't ask permission. So think about that, and let's go back for a minute to the errand boy slide from the beginning, and think about, how do you want to be considered in your career? And do you want to be a person seen as using permission words? So that's why I think it's really important for us to take a look at some of these things and how they affect our job search outcomes and how they affect our overall career outcomes. When I was in the corporate world, I had so many people reach out to me asking me if I had a job on my team. And inevitably, the answer was that awful word that we won't use. But I didn't have many jobs. I was in research. I had small teams. And that ended our conversation. And I always thought, why wouldn't they ask me a different question? Why wouldn't they ask me for my advice about getting into the field that I was in? Or why wouldn't they ask me if I knew of any jobs that were out there that they could apply for? So asking people for their advice, not just for a job, opens up a whole new dialogue. It also allows them to get to know you a little. If you say, maybe we can have a 30-minute call. I'd really like to know about some opportunities that you may know about if you have some time. And if they really like you and have a job on their team, they'll bring that up. So you haven't closed that door. You've just opened many, many more. So I always advise people when they're reaching out to people on LinkedIn or anywhere else, especially if it's a cold reach out, with someone you don't know, to make sure that you're asking for advice, not for a job. So networking meetings are pretty important to get right. So you've got an opportunity to meet with someone who potentially has an opportunity for you. And it's so easy to do these things really, really well, but it doesn't take much to get them wrong. So I'm going to talk about some of the kind of cardinal rules that I follow when I've previously had networking meetings and that have worked for me. So meet at a location that's convenient for them, even if that means getting on a call. I know, we all know how busy people can be when it comes to their professional lives, especially people who are entrepreneurs, because for an entrepreneur, time is money. So making sure that you make it really easy for them to get together with you and make that clear that you will make that easy is going to be really important. Of course, when you're meeting with someone who works in a corporate job, meeting at their office is always ideal. Timing is interesting. So I always give people the tip that really busy executives usually don't have time during the day to take a lot of, additional meetings, particularly with people they don't know. So one really great time to suggest is breakfast or a coffee before the day starts. So at 8 or 8:30, usually people that are pretty senior are early risers. They have no choice but to be. So that time it's not usually dead time, but time they might do, be working around the office. So that's a great time to suggest to meet them. Another trick I use, and it's not on the slide, is I say to people that I really want to meet with, if they work out in Mississauga, for instance, even if I'm not going to be there, I say, I'm going to be in Mississauga next Tuesday and Thursday. I have time in the afternoon if you want to meet. And that I've said to them, I'm going to be near them. So it makes it easy. So they actually very often have taken me up on that in the past. Be early or on time. This is a non-negotiable. I have 2 young kids. If I have an early morning meeting, I find someone else to look after them. My husband takes them. If he's not available, my parents will take them. So I really always make sure I'm early or on time for a meeting, because if you are at all late, it's going to reflect very poorly on you. And I think it's going to make it very difficult to continue that relationship in a meaningful way. If it's someone you don't know. I even say that with my family and friends. I'm always earlier on time, because I want them to know, like we talked about before, it's about being one consistent person no matter who you're with. And even as much as your family and friends love you, they are still going to be wary about helping you if you are not early or on time. Be prepared with discussion points and a purpose. So show the person who's meeting with you, you are ready and prepared, and you've thought about what you're discussing. Watching the time is really important. So one trick that I like to use is if someone's agreed to meet me from 11 till 11:30, I get there at 11 and I say, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. I know we have 30 minutes and I'll make sure that we stick to the time. And as the meeting progresses, at halftime, I'll say, I know we've got 15 minutes left, so we so that they don't get stressed out that I'm in the middle of a sentence at 2 minutes to 11:30 and I'm still going strong. And they're going to be late for their next meeting and they don't want to be rude and interrupt me. This is a funny one, but we really have to make sure that if we've agreed to meet someone, it's probably obvious to most of us, that we pay. So if it's a coffee, we wait for them to get there till we get our coffee as well, and we jump up and make sure that we pay. Some people will insist on paying, especially if we're in a situation where we're out of work, they'll want to pay. And if they really push it, fine, but we should always be the ones to make sure we jump up with our credit cards. Follow up with a thank you note. You can write a note. People love to get cards. Following up with an email obviously is more immediate and people are going to expect quick. So it's always good to follow up with an email and a thank you card, which is great. The other thing about a thank you card is it makes you more memorable. And I talked about memories being fragile, so true when it comes to the job search. So sending a thank you note will really make you more memorable. And that can be the difference that it makes for you in terms of getting a job. And then close the loop. If someone's helped you and met with you, even if you don't end up getting a job through them, they've given you their time, and it shows that they've demonstrated that they care. So make sure that you follow up if you get a job. I get notes all the time, and I'm always delighted to get them. They're the best notes of my day, is when someone writes to me and says, Amy, I just want you to know that I got this job at this company, and it makes me just so happy to know, because if they don't get back to me, they're always a loose end in my mind, like, oh, I wonder how that person is doing. And I'm really, really happy to see that. And I think the people in your network will be too. So let's talk a little bit about resumes and LinkedIn. I know these are things people, particularly resumes, which people really struggle with, and I absolutely understand why. Because resumes are not, you just don't write them every day, right? So people are always embarrassed. I work on people's resumes. I don't write people's resumes. There's a lot of services that will write your resume for you. I don't believe in that. What I do with my clients is I audit their resumes. You have to own your resume. And if you're speaking to a savvy recruiter or interviewer, they will see that the language you use in your resume is different from the language that you're using in conversation, and they'll wonder what you contributed to that resume. So when I work with my clients, it's actually good, because it's less money to get it audited than to get it written as well. So I go through it with them and help them by giving them detailed feedback on their resume, including the format. And then they write, they are able to write it based on that feedback. And then of course, getting it edited is really important. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what makes a resume work? So the approach that I like is, if somebody sits down and thinks of their prospective employer or recruiter, what do they want to see? What thing, obviously we can't change our entire history, but what is going to matter to them? What are they trying to get from a candidate in this type of role? And also, what do they want to see when they see the resume? How quickly do they want to be able to go through it? And when it comes to resumes, I think it's really important to stand in versus standing out. So I know people like to use a lot of fancy design in their resumes. This is actually going to hold you back, because a recruiter or an employer, they want to look through your resume really quickly. They want to look at it from top to bottom and left to right and scan it the first time. And then that will make their decision whether it goes into the keep file or the discard file. And you want to get in that keep file, and then they're going to go through it in more detail. So I strongly advise people avoid things like humor, because humor can be misconstrued. I've had someone say something like sarcastic wit in their profile summary. That's intimidating to somebody, because if someone says they have sarcastic wit, think about it from your perspective. You know yourself, you're probably a nice person and you're good to people. But someone who says that might make fun of me. And that's what I might see when I read that. And I don't really want to meet that person, right? That's just one example. But humor can be totally misunderstood in writing when someone doesn't know you. I like achievement-based resumes, because especially it can only happen if you've been in the career world for over 5 years, because it's really hard to make a ton of achievements before that. But really focusing on your achievements is going to help you stand out, because a company wants to see what you've achieved so that they can see what you will achieve for them. Simpler is better, and simpler is better not just in terms of the layout of the resume, which I've talked about, but also in the language that you use. If your language is too flowery and too sophisticated, if you use too many acronyms, people asked in some of the notes that I was sent beforehand about the systems, the ATS systems, and those are the systems that are automated, that take the words from your resume and the words from the job search and put them together. If your language is too flowery and use too many acronyms, that's going to prevent you from passing through those systems. So be very careful with that. You want to come across as a clear communicator. I love the writing of Malcolm Gladwell, because you can read one of his books. He wrote The Tipping Point and the book Blink, and you can look at his books, and a 10-year-old can read them and get something out of them, and you and I could read them and get something totally different. But the fact is that we can both read them and understand something and take something from them. That's how you should approach your resume. You don't want to fool people. You want them to see who you really are. I see all the time that people's resumes are more than 2 pages. Never make a resume more than 2 pages. I talked a little bit about my background. I've lived in had careers in 2 different countries. I've worked for multiple organizations. I've been an entrepreneur. I can fit my resume onto 2 pages. If I can do it, I believe most people can. So it will really make you stand out if your resume is more than that. Get an editor. I like to think that, I know some of the people in the call don't live in Canada, but in Canada, we depend on our immigrant population to contribute in a meaningful way to our economy. And I hope that recruiters and employers are getting savvy to that and understanding that not everyone's first language was English. But just to be sure, my first language is English, I still get an editor. I make a ton of mistakes on my own work. I'm a great editor of other people's work, not a greatest editor of my own. So just make sure you get an editor to get it right. The components that should be on your resume, I always like a profile in the beginning. I love that profile to be in first person. You want people who are going to hire you to get to know you a little bit. They want to feel like they know you if they're going to have you come in for an interview, and that will make you stand out. It shouldn't be long, just a few sentences, 3 sentences, a very short paragraph about some of the things you've achieved, maybe some of the brands you worked with, the value that you will add to that business. Your work experience. If you are questioning the last job you've had or your current job, is it going to fit with the role that you're applying for, and you want another role to be first, you can always have a heading instead of experience, relevant experience. Start with your relevant experience. Then if you were an entrepreneur or something like that in an unrelated field, you could have a new heading for entrepreneurial experience. And if that was your most recent role, at least it's not at the top of the page, and it won't get you put in the good pile that a recruiter wants to continue with. So that's one little trick you can use. Of course, your education, any skills, training that you've had. I wouldn't go too far in terms of the training. Don't anticipate that companies are going to be, really excited about these training courses you've taken with your company. Just put them in one line. That's a good way of saving space rather than put them one after the other. And your relevant extracurricular. I see a lot of funny things in terms of extracurricular activity. Companies like when people are doing things like marathon runners and things like that. That could be relevant because it might speak to your work ethic. If you love taking your dog for walks in the park, that's probably not going to be particularly relevant unless you're applying for a job at PetSmart. Then it will be relevant. Or at Mars, where they manufactured pet food, then that might be relevant. But just keep in mind that you want relevant extracurricular if you include it. I'm sure we all know this, and I've talked about it already, but the same people who look at your resume will also be looking at your LinkedIn and all of your social media. I really strongly suggest, my friend is a social media expert. Her name's Leslie Hughes. She actually wrote a great book for anybody looking to enhance their LinkedIn profile. It's called Create, Connect, Convert. And she talks about searching your own name on Google and seeing what comes up. So any employer that's taking you seriously, I said earlier, 80% go to your LinkedIn profile next. So getting your LinkedIn right is really important. I don't go into great detail on LinkedIn. I suggest, anyone on the call who hasn't connected with me on LinkedIn, certainly I welcome you to do that. I also strongly advise you to connect with Leslie Hughes. She regularly puts up content about LinkedIn and how to get that right. One of the first things is your picture, a professional picture where it's just you. Smiling is really, really important. We talked a little bit about how our brains respond to words. The way our brains respond to faces is we like them to look head on at us. So just keep that in mind. Eye contact with the camera is better than looking away from the camera, those sort of things. So think about it. I love, and Leslie recommends this as well, summaries that are written in first person. You're writing about yourself. Everybody knows that. It kind of looks funny when we write in third person. And if you have a profile that's written in first person, you start looking at all the other profiles that are written in third person and wonder, why on earth is this person doing that? So just keep that in mind. So your preparation. When I talk about preparation, I mean your preparation for a job interview. So what do you do? I want you to just think about that for a second. If you've got a job interview next week or tomorrow, what are you doing to prepare? One of the things that I suggest people do is they take a look, or they sit down with a pen and paper and they write their story from the very beginning of their career to current times. So what have you done from the very beginning, whether it's your education, and I don't just recommend writing it down, like typing it out. I recommend writing it with a pen and paper in the old-fashioned way and telling your story for each of your jobs. What have been your accomplishments? What difficulties have you had in your jobs, and how have you overcome those? I call this storytelling your way to interview success. I've written an article on it on my website, which is easy to access. I've given examples of why it doesn't work as well to prepare with the bullet point form approach. Because if you prepare in bullet points, you will speak in bullet points. And we love stories. So anyone interviewing you will love that you tell your story. So really think about that when it comes to interviewing and when you're preparing. And the thing that I've helped my clients with and that I find really works is that when they actually sit down the night before their interview, even if they've written out their whole story, you only have to do it once. And then you go back to that exercise the night before your interview and go through the 3 or 4 stories one more time that you think that you're going to want to talk about during the interview the next day, and you write it out again in long form with a pen and paper. Make a huge difference. It will make, and the other great thing about it is it actually makes you remember more when it comes to a story, and it will relax you. So you remember details, and trust me, the very first time you do this, you'll be amazed because you'll remember more than you think that you would expect to remember. Okay, the interview. So let's talk about the interview. One of the things that I find that is not spoken about as much as one might expect in the business world is called imprinting. And imprinting is defined as rapid learning that occurs during a brief receptive period and establishes a long-lasting behavioral response to a specific person, object, category, whatever it is. So your very first memories of chocolate are going to impact how you respond to that category for the rest of your life. If and we've all had this experience, you go to a restaurant that your friends say is amazing and they love it, and you go to it, and your first experience of it is the maitre d' is rude to you, your food is cold. You're never going to want to go back there because even if you go again and it's okay and it's better, you're going to have imprinted with that very first experience. And once a belief system is established, it's very hard to change that belief system, whether it's about a person, whether it's about a brand, whether it's about a restaurant. So one example that's actually quite relevant in the news today is about vaccinations for children. So there's many parents who have been imprinted with the belief and built a belief system that vaccinations cause autism. And what the medical community did, because they saw that there was a huge drop in vaccination rates, was went to market with an advertising campaign to say, hey, everybody, there's no link between vaccinations and autism. This just isn't true. So please go vaccinate your children. And guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. Nothing changed, because you're not going to convince a parent who believes that vaccination is going to cause their child to develop autism. You're not going to convince them that that's not going to happen. So they all went back to the drawing board with their ad agency and changed the story. And they came to market with the stories of parents who hadn't had their children vaccinated and the impact that had and the very immediate danger that they could be putting their children in. And that really turned things around, Because what they did was they, rather than to fight the established belief system, they created a new belief system and a far more scarier belief system. So all of this is to say that once once a belief system is established about us as people, whether it be in our personal lives or professional lives, it can be incredibly difficult, even with all the evidence to the contrary, to change someone's beliefs about us, bad or good. And there's another phenomenon called actor-observer bias. And what that is if there is something that goes wrong and you make a mistake, you blame it on all kinds of other factors. But if I make a mistake, you blame that very same mistake based on all the same factors, you blame that mistake on me. So that's why I say to people, when you go for interviews, when you start jobs, when you're networking, make sure that you're on time. Because even if the traffic was horrid on your first day of the job and your boss is late and you're late, they're going to blame their lateness on the traffic and your lateness on you. And they're going to look at you and think of you as unreliable on your very first interaction on your first day at the job. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this process of job searching. I know it's a lot to think about. I'm just surprised that we don't talk about imprinting more when it comes to our overall success in our job searches and our overall success in our careers. So I'm sure that it's no surprise that body language is incredibly important when it comes to imprinting. There is an amazing woman named Amy Cuddy. She's written a book called Presence. She has one of the highly watched TED Talks that you can look up about body language. I strongly advise you question whether you've got good or bad body language and how that's going to affect your overall outcome to watch her video. So many people have learned so much from her about this. Having great, confident body language. If I've been in meetings before and looked around the room wondering why certain people have become so senior so quickly and why certain people who I consider really bright and exceptional in their field, why they failed to get to the level that I would expect. And really one of the big things that I found that's separating them is body language. And I write about that in the book. It's really important to our career outcome. And body language can determine whether we have good or bad rapport, right? So if you look at this, I love this slide. It makes me feel good to look at it. You know that the people in the slide have great rapport, right? You can feel the positivity generating from the slide. And I talk to people about this as well in terms of when you have a career, when you're in a job and you're having, a great time with someone, you can always tell the people that seem to get along with everyone really well. They have this positive buzz around them. Everyone wants to talk to them. People are so relaxed around them. When you have a great boss and you're happy to talk to them, you can see that. You can see the positivity. But people think that when they are having a real tough time at work and when they're having difficulty relating to people and maybe talking about them behind their back, that people aren't going to notice. And all I do is I show them this slide. And you can really see that when we have difficult, strained relationships with people, that will come out, right? So keep that in mind when you're interviewing, when you start jobs, the importance of having great rapport. Let's just go back to the other side to make ourselves feel good again. But really think about that. You can read up on a lot of this. I haven't personally written a ton about it myself. I've written about it in the book, but you can read up on how to have good body language in job interviews. I write a bit about mirroring in my book. That's a trick that you can use when you interview. And that's simply, if your interviewer leans forward, you lean forward similarly. If they lean to the side, you lean to the side in a similar fashion. You don't want to make it too obvious. There are ways you can break the mirror and not mirror someone and it's ineffective. I write about that in the book too. But just keep that in mind. Mirror someone's tone of voice. It's a good way if someone's actually angry to get them to calm down. So if they're yelling at you, you talk in a very calm voice, and they're yelling and you talk in a calm voice, and you continue to do that, you will actually bring the level of their voice down. So there's really interesting ways you can use mirroring and body language to change your outcome. like get past that one. So when we're in interviews, it's really important that we look out for potential issues and beware of a bad boss and bad workplace and read the signs. There are signs in interviews. And in the book, I write about the prevalence of psychopaths in our everyday lives. You know, we think of psychopaths as the Ted Bundy and the Jeffrey Dahmers, but there's a great book called Without Conscience by Robert Hare. And he writes, he's a criminal psychologist. He's a member of the Order of Canada. He studied criminal psychology for his entire career. And he estimates that 4 to 5% of the North American population are non-murderous psychopaths, and the implications that has on our everyday life. So his estimation is that only 1% of psychopaths are actually murderous psychopaths or blood hungry, you know, like the Jeffrey Dahmers and the Ted Bundys. But I believe that it's really important for us to know this about our careers, because if we don't know this, we wonder why people become bullies in the workplace and what we didn't see and the signs we didn't read. The people that can be the worst people to work with often seem like they're the nicest at first, but listening to what other people say about them is really important. I write a lot about workplace bullies in Spark in the Dark. I've also just written an article on bullying that's on my website. And I do think that it's really important, because if we end up in a situation where we're in a toxic environment working for bad people, it's going to affect our overall lives. It will affect our professional outcomes, and it will have all kinds of ripple-on effects in our personal lives. So if you talk to people and you get a sense that something's going wrong, ask questions in the interview like, why is this role open? Find out if there's been multiple people who have only been in that role for less than a year. Talk to other people in the company. Look around. Do people look happy? Are they walking with, a spring in their step? Or are they sort of looking gloomy and looking down and tense? You can often feel tension in the air. So look for these things. Sorry, I've already covered, what are the red flags, but jokes, humor is often a big thing that people use in interviews to send you a message. I'll give you an example. So I interviewed for a job once. At the time, I was a single mother, and I wanted work-life balance. It was still incredibly important to me. It's always been incredibly important to me. And I went into the interview, and I was very clear about that. And the global HR person went on and on to me about how it was such a great company and how work-life balance, they wanted, parents and families and millennials to love working there. The woman who was the local HR person made a joke to me later on in the interview about her kids not recognizing her at the end of the week. So she was sending me a very clear signal by making a joke that I fortunately picked up on, and I I decided not to continue on with that company because of that. So just really, the red flags are there. We just have to know what we're looking for. I know it can be tough. And I also know that sometimes we need a job. We need money to live. So you have to take a job where we know that we're entering a bad environment. What I suggest to people in that case is make sure that you don't stop your job search, even if things feel good. We all go through a honeymoon period in our jobs. If you sense something's wrong, something is probably wrong, keep looking. And when you got another great job, I don't care if you've been in that new job for a week, you take that other great job. That company doesn't deserve you. So find the next great thing and go for it, and don't stop. I will emphasize it one more time. Do not ignore the red flags. Okay, so the follow-up. Once you've had a great interview, people are often confused about what to do next, and I totally get it. It can be confusing, like what's the timing on this? What do I say? I'd say definitely reach out by email, both to say thank you, and if you haven't heard in a few days, you can always follow up and ask, for an update. Make sure that you keep the tone light and emphasize your interest, right? So make sure they know that you're interested. Sometimes we can seem, we're trying not to look like we really want something in an interview or negotiate. We want to be able to be in a strong negotiating position for a salary. So make sure that they know that you're interested in the role. Be open to feedback. We've heard it a million times. Feedback is a gift. Sometimes people don't know if you want feedback. I'm somebody who, I can be pretty straightforward, but I do tend to avoid giving feedback to people if they don't ask for it. So if you want feedback, ask for feedback, and you might be surprised what comes back. Remind them of a positive moment. This is actually a great trick to use in an interview. So when you are in the interview, you can figure out what makes the interviewer smile. So a few years ago, many years ago now, I guess, when I lived in London, when I was living in England, I was in an interview and I was told that this person was pretty tough. So I had his background. We didn't have LinkedIn, so I had to actually read his resume and bio that I was supplied with. And I realized that he'd had a sabbatical a couple of years before. So I thought, people tend to enjoy their sabbaticals. They do what they want. So I asked him about the sabbatical in the interview. And I said, tell me about your sabbatical. What did you do? And immediately he started beaming. And he told me a bit about what he did. And he said, but the best thing about it was that I learned how to play piano. And then, we had a great discussion about that. I used to play piano, and then we moved on. So at the end of the interview, as he was walking me to the door of his office, I brought that up again. I said, so have you continued playing piano since your sabbatical ended? And he started smiling again. He said, I haven't, but the most wonderful thing about it all is that my children, because of my learning piano, decided to take it up. So now they play the piano in the house, and it's wonderful. So he had such a positive, that I imprinted so positively, because when he thought about me, he thought about smiling. To try to get your interviewer to do that. And then when you email them in a follow-up, remind them of a positive moment that you shared during that time. And when you email, make sure it's brief. Emails can seem longer than they are now because we're reading them on a small screen often. So that, on our smartphones, so they can look a lot longer. So I always give the advice, why say boo-hoo when boo will do? So think about that when you're emailing somebody as a follow-up. What is the length of the email you're sending? Even if it all makes sense, try to keep it short and sweet. So let's talk, for the last few minutes about your North Star and, how you get there. So this is the scenario that I like to try to help people avoid in their career. It's kind of stood up for me. I found it in the New Yorker. I don't want people feeling like they're about to go over the cliff if they could have planned and avoided it, right? So one of the things that I have available, it's free. It's a resource that you're more than welcome to use. Just send me an email and I'll send you a copy. It's a goal setting template. I really do believe that people who fail to set professional goals will fail to reach their career potential. And I really don't like to see that happen to people. I don't know where I would be if I didn't set goals. If you've never set goals before, one really great way to start is by setting really small goals for yourself and really easily attainable goals. One of the things that I did when I was starting out setting goals was I decided one year that I was, believe it or not, many, many years ago, I felt like I was becoming pretty negative. And, I was going into stores and noticing people not helping me with things I needed and getting really frustrated. Then I thought, you know what, I'm going to make this the year of positivity. And every time that I see somebody doing a great job or helping me or going above and beyond with customer service or even doing a little significant thing, I'm going to write to that company with their name and information, and I'm going to let them know how good that employee was to me. And I still do it today. That was many, many years ago, and I still try to do it today. And I'll tell you, the world changed. I stopped seeing negativity, and I started seeing great things in people, and the world really opened up. It was like the clouds cleared and the sun shone. So if you have never set goals before, set yourself a simpler goal like that one first. But setting goals is really, really important, and it will help you get to where you want to be. So reach out to me if you want that template. I'm happy to send it. I've talked a lot about all the ways we can approach our careers and our interviews and our job searches. But what I'd like to say is, be yourself. This may be someone else's way. You might have your own unique way. I love this quote from Dennis Lee in Alligator Pie. There's so many people I don't seem to be. I guess I'll just have to get up and be me. And I really recommend that to you as you're going through this process of your career search. Be yourself, because that's what you want people to hire you for. It's really hard to be somebody else. So I hope that helps you. This is me. This is how to contact me. The business I run is called Reorg World, and you can find a ton more information, a ton of free resources there. But I think that is it for today. Thank you so much for attending. I hope that you got what you needed and maybe some things you didn't expect out of this discussion. And all the very, very best of luck with your job search and your career success. Take care.